Welcome to the Evelyn Y. Davis Studios at the National Press Foundation. Coming up, survival strategies for managing your journalism career. Networking, reviving your resume, playing well with editors. It's all right now. The National Press Foundation is a nonprofit dedicated to helping journalists cover complex topics with depth and accuracy. Our mission includes journalists around the U.S. and around the world. I'm Linda Topping-Streitfeld, Director of Programs at the National Press Foundation, and with me today is Jody Schneider. She's an editor, currently in charge of congressional coverage for Bloomberg, also a veteran recruiter and trainer. She's done resume doctoring at the National Press Club and elsewhere, and she's a popular speaker for our own Paul Miller Fellows on newsroom management and career development. Jody, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's great to see you. We want all of you to be part of the discussion today. You can log in to discuss under the webinar screen or sign in as a guest and then type in your questions. It's first come, first served on the questions, so ask away and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, Jody, when I think about managing my career, I think about looking for a job, right? That's the time when you need to really manage your career, but you see it a little differently.
That's right. I think most people think of it that way, that you don't really think about your career, you think about your job, the job that you're doing, and then when it's time to find a new career, which in our profession these days is happening a lot more than it used to, obviously, people then think, oh no, I need to deal with my resume, I need to deal with my network. Where's my network? What happened to it? And it's often not a great time when you're under the stress of looking for a job to start redoing your resume, to start especially to start worrying about your network. Those are things you should be managing as you go along. I like to say it's like you don't learn to cook when you get really hungry, right? You should know before then. You should develop skills. It's like managing your finances. No one else is going to do this for you. I think people sometimes feel a little bit disloyal, like, well, if I'm worrying about my resume and my network, I'm not giving my full devotion to my job. Well, you do worry about your job. You worry about your job when you're there. On your own time, you should be worrying about your career, and no one else is going to do that for you.
Well, I appreciate that, and that emphasizes the importance of this whole discussion today. So let's start with the resume. First of all, why do we need a resume?
Your resume is your calling card. This is the one piece of evidence that you will leave with prospective employers, that you will give to people whom you hope will pass it on to prospective employers. It basically is a snapshot of your experience and why someone should hire you. Mm-hmm. It is not a compendium. People sometimes think, oh, everything I've ever done I have to have in that resume. You don't want that, but it really is your calling card. So it is really key to career management, and it's certainly key to a job search.
Okay, I have a resume. I graduated from college maybe a little more than a few years ago. My resume is nicely formatted. Can I just keep adding my new jobs and experience to the top of this existing resume? It seems like the simplest thing to do.
And many people do that, and it's not a good thing to do.
Oh.
First of all, it gets too long. And really, do you want your prospective employer to have to focus on things you did 20 years ago that you're not at all interested in doing now and that are going to seem dated? What you really want is you want a fresh resume that gives a snapshot of who you are and why you are a right person for the kinds of jobs that are available today and the way journalism has changed. These are often very different kinds of jobs than we did even 10, 15 years ago. So I'm going to say something that a lot of people are going to say, oh, I can't do that. But you want your resume, even if you're mid-career, even mid to late career, you should try to get your resume to a page.
Okay, so I am going to stop you there because I feel like so many resumes now are read online that the whole concept of a page is less meaningful than it used to be. Why that single page?
First of all, someone's going to print it out. I still do some recruiting and have done a lot in recent years. At one point I was a recruiter and trainer for a newsroom. And the first thing you do, or among the first things you do when you have a resume that you are interested in, is to print it out. If you're the recruiter, you're printing it out to give to the hiring managers who are going to talk to this person. But it's a lot easier to sort of deal with it when it's sitting before you. You can mark it up. You can do all kinds of things. So people are going to print it out. So look at it as a physical document and think about how it looks. The other thing about a page is it is concise that way. You are giving a snapshot. You are not going on too long about things that may not be so important. So I encourage people to try to get it to a page, which means editing and which means focusing on what's important. So it's also the act of doing this that will help. And then walk away from it. Leave it, don't look at it for a day, come back and say, okay, if there's some things I really need to add, I can add them, I'm allowed. And a lot of times you think, no, this looks pretty good.
And should you be doing that yourself, or should you find someone else to look at your resume for you or with you? And if so, who should that be?
Yeah, I know some people want to go to, resume doctors and people who, there are coaching services. And if you're really worried about how it looks or think you need, help in terms of actually culling it and putting it together from a visual standpoint, from a graphic standpoint, it's fine to use those. But I think most people can do their resume on their own. There's a ton of good software out there. Play around with different fonts, with different things, to see how you look. But you want somebody who is going to look at it. I tend to recommend that people have, particularly when they're job hunting, but also sort of as part of managing their careers, a career kitchen cabinet. Some trusted people, friends are good. It shouldn't be somebody who relies partly on your income, because they can sometimes be there might be a little bit more pressure there.
So not your spouse.
Spouses are family members are often not good at this. They shall we say, lack some perspective.
Gotcha.
But somebody who knows you, who knows your career and will be honest with you, who can look at your resume and say, oh, this looks great, but why did you leave this part out? That was an important job you had, or why are you focusing so much on this? I thought you were looking for a job in this kind of field, and this is not going to help you. This person can also help you. I know we're talking about resumes right now, but this person can also help you when it comes to prepping you for an interview. They can, I suggest doing actual practice interviews with somebody, who's interviewing you. Right. So I think it's really important to have somebody look at the resume. The other thing I'll say about this kind of fear of leaving things out is resumes now, because they are digital, because we're doing them electronically, are living, breathing documents. So you don't have to even have the same resume. If you're looking for different kinds of jobs, you can have a different resume. You can update it for that. And that once you have a format set and all that, that doesn't take a lot of time or too much energy.
Right. Well, which brings me to this. Obviously, for journalists, being able to share their clips or their journalism work in some form is very important. Right. What would you say? I mean, I remember carrying a portfolio of clips, and what would you say is the best way to do that now?
Well, first of all, to have links is important, and to have so that people can go right to your work. But the best thing to do, especially if you have a fair amount of work, is to have a website. And you're going to want to list that website right at the top. We're going to get a little bit, I know, in a minute into how you organize your resume. But that website, it should be up to date. It should be attractive. It should be clean. It should be well organized so that somebody can see things right on there, and you can then update your work. So I think that's the best thing. I know that sometimes there's an issue with paywalls and firewalls, and that getting to your journalism work can be hard. A website, especially if there's if you've negotiated being able to put some of this on your website to show your work, can get around some of that, and it's just easier. Somebody can just click on and read at their leisure. I also suggest, as a way of getting, keeping somebody's attention who you may be talking to about a job over a period of time, you can send them new links saying, oh, I just did this piece, thought you might enjoy reading it. It's a good way to stay in touch and to keep them, let them know that you've gotten good, fresh, updated work.
Right. So just to recap, you're suggesting that every journalist have a personal website. It should include their resume and their clips, and those clips would be videos they've produced, PDFs of article. If they can't publish a link,
right,
because their work is behind a paywall,
right,
they can create a PDF of whatever their story is and put that up on their personal website.
Right. And there it is. The resume really becomes sort of the guide to the site. And in using ones that are well done and perusing them when I've looked at resumes, it really is. You want to make this process. You want to make it as easy for the reader as possible, right, just like when you produce journalism, right? You don't want the reader to get tripped up, and you want, right, them to read the whole story. So if you make it easy for your reader, who is the recruiter or hiring manager, or whomever is reading your resume, and you give them this website as well, that really is making it much more likely that they're going to focus on your work.
Do you recommend any particular platform for creating your website? There are lots of them out there now.
Not really. I mean, it really depends, first of all, on what kind of work you're doing. If you're just a print or digital journalist who doesn't have a lot of videos, or you're not a graphic artist, you can use a pretty clean, straightforward one. Right. But obviously, if you're, say, a graphic artist and you're going to show a lot of, data visualization kinds of work, interactive graphics, you're going to want to get fancier.
Right, right. Okay, so let's talk specifically about the resume. I'm supposed to keep it to a page, and it's supposed to be my calling card. What does need to be in it, and how should I organize it?
Okay. Well, so one of the things that you want to do is you want to make it really easy to get in touch with you. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes people put on their resumes, people sometimes still put addresses on their street address. I don't think you need that anymore. First of all, if you're looking for a job someplace else in another city, let's say you're living in D.C., but you want, right, to work in California.
I don't want to advertise that.
You don't want to advertise the fact that they're going to have to move you, because most places don't pay to move you now. So if you're looking for one locally and want to stay local, that's fine. But you definitely want your name, and in a bold kind of fashion, so that you're sort of, they can remember who you are. Remember, this might be in a stack of papers someplace. So that's important. Oh, and one thing, I'm going to digress a little bit, but this happens a lot. People send an email, with their resume attached, and it says "my resume" or something like that, or it has an old email address because it's been, you forwarded an introduction or something. On every single time that you are forwarding your resume, say your full name, resume, so they remember, oh yes, this is what this is. It's right. A little thing, but it's meaningful. So you want at the top, your name, your website if you have it, a phone number of which you can regularly be reached, and
preferably not your work phone number.
Yes, and I'll get to that in a second. And an email address, also not a work email. You don't want to be doing any job hunting on your work time.
Right.
First of all, it's a good way to get in trouble with your current employer. Secondly, it signals to your prospective employer that you don't take your current job all that seriously, because you're job hunting on their dime. So you don't want to do that. And some people will say, well, if I make a phone call, no, you don't want to do that. Do everything, everything's mobile these days. Mm-hmm. Take a walk and make a phone call on your mobile phone if you have to get in touch with somebody. Make sure it's all personal devices that you're doing this on.
Got it.
The other thing is, sometimes, and this tends to be, I would say, early career people, but not always, they put a phone number on there and you can't reach them. Or it's their home phone number and the kid is one of their kids is answering and maybe forgets to leave a message. Have a phone number which you're going to check regularly, and if you're actively applying for jobs, regularly means a couple times a day.
Right.
Things move fast.
Right.
And if you're not available, somebody's going to move on to the next candidate. Mm-hmm. You also want your outgoing phone message not to be, you singing a cute song or saying, what I love is people say, you know what to do. Well, what I know what to do is to call the next person on my list. None of that cutesy things. Just keep it straightforward. And you want to be viewed as a serious person. Mm. And so you want all these things in your, in your resume and your email address, everything to just be straightforward and serious. Mm-hmm. So that's at the top of your resume. Then you want to go, the next part is that you want to have, they're called, you can call them summary, you can call them some other kinds of things, there's, profile, but you want to have a little bit about you. Often bullet items are good that can tell you, here's some facts about me. If you've done a lot of electronic journalism, real-time journalism, you want to say that there. Things that will kind of get someone's attention very quickly before you start listing your experience.
That makes sense. So I have a question which can lead us to the next thing we want to do. The question is, when you say put your resume on one page, is LinkedIn enough, or do you recommend that every journalist have his or her own website? Well, we've answered the website question, yes, but is LinkedIn enough? And what do you feel about LinkedIn?
I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. For a few reasons. We'll talk a little bit about it when we get to networking, because it's a really good way to help build your network.
Right. But you had talked about using that as a sort of template for building
a resume. Yes, it's a great template for what you want on your resume. And one of the things that it does is it asks you some attributes that can be your bullet items at the top of your page.
Can we look at it?
Sure.
I think we are able to pull up actually your LinkedIn site.
Okay, we'll see if I'm up to date here.
There you go.
Oh, good. I have my right
famous
title.
Yeah.
Summary is a good way to do these bullet items. You kind of talk about, mine is, creative, forward-looking thinker, and talented manager. I'm talking about the different roles I've had, but also some of, what I see as the attributes that I want to promote in myself. Because, your resume is your calling card. It's your promotional tool.
Now this used to be a place where you would put job goals, employment goals. Is that out of date? We don't do that anymore?
Yeah, that's pretty out of date. The other thing is that you don't want to limit yourself that much because things have changed so fast. If you say, well, my job goal is to be an editor at some kind of publication or news organization, well, somebody may have just started a new part of their organization that you might be good for, and they look at it and say, well, hold on. And it's easy to look out of date pretty quickly with things like job goals. So I think the attributes is good. It also gives somebody kind of a taste of who you are, which is what you want your resume to be.
Okay. So following the summary.
So then you want to go back to, and experience, like you have to list it on LinkedIn, is a good way to talk about what you've done. You want to be very, obviously you're going to go into more detail than you have on LinkedIn, but you want to be straightforward. You want to give the job title, but you want to explain on your resume in terms of what you've been able to achieve rather than just what your job title was.
Right.
So, and this is a little trickier for journalists. If you're in sales, for instance, you can give what your sales achievements, what your revenue achievements were. You can show year over year the growth. Right. We don't do it so much that way. Right. We're not as metrically, oriented as say people in business are. However,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah. However, there are some things you can do. You can talk about. First of all, if you've won awards, if you've been able to, the kinds of journalism you did, the scoops you've had, that's beating the competition, those kinds of things, and what you were able to do. If you're a manager, how you were able to change your team, to build a team, to do to meet the kinds of goals that your organization wanted you to meet, and that would result in these achievements that you want to show. So you do want to do that. You want to keep it concise. You also want to think about how it looks. Sometimes people have big blocks of type and they list every single thing they did in an organization, and it's hard to read.
Right.
Both on the screen and when you print it out. So more is less. Less is more, I guess is the phrase. Right. Less is more. You want to call it. You want to do what the most important things were. Mm-hmm. Another tip, because a lot of journalists have been places where they've had several different jobs, you don't want to have big blocks of type. You want to combine things. If you were at an organization for 15 years but you had 5 different jobs, explain that.
Right.
But you don't have to list every single thing. So I also suggest that you leave off jobs that were more than 10, 15 years ago. You can say things like, I I was a journalist at news organizations in these states. People want to know that information. They'll ask you for it.
Right, and that's important, obviously, for mid-career or older journalists looking for new jobs. Are there any other tips for older people on their resumes or as they're job hunting?
Yeah, the challenge for somebody who's mid-career or older is that you don't want to look dated and you don't want to look old and you don't want your resume to look old.
Right.
You want to seem vibrant. We all want to seem vibrant, and especially these days with how fast things are moving in our profession, both in terms of the news cycle as well as changes in the profession, you really want to look like you are keeping up with that. So that's why I say jobs that you had a long time ago that were important at the time, but don't sort of speak as much to what you're doing now. They were more building blocks. You don't even have to have them on there, or you can keep them on. Say, I keep my jobs on my LinkedIn profile, but I don't have them all on my resume. The other thing about that in terms of meeting that challenge of older or mid-career folks is with education, which we'll get to in a minute, you don't need to list the years that you graduated. There's no reason to do that. I tell people, even if it's more than 10 years ago, why list it? If somebody wants to ask you, you'll tell them, but you don't have to advertise that. There's really no reason to do that.
What about, well, we'll get to education in a minute when we go back to that. Anything else for older? What about, I see people with email addresses that I barely recognize their, what that is. Is there any specific advice about what kind of email you should have on a resume?
Right. Besides not using your employer's email, which is always bad, you want to have a Gmail account, or mine's a Verizon account that I've had for a while, and that I used a long time. I think those are fine. You want it to be businesslike, and if you have an AOL account, it looks dated, right? And so you don't want to raise any red flags about anything in a job search because things are so competitive. So establish something that works for you. Again, it's very important that it's one that you check all the time. That's the most important thing. But I would say, stay away from things that are going to look if they have CompuServe email addresses anymore. Oh, and then the other thing is students often use, obviously, their email from their schools, sometimes for a few years after they graduate, and that's fine. But if you're 10 years out of school, it shouldn't be saying Terp Mail anymore. it's a little dated at that point.
Got it.
Looks like you're hanging on a little too much.
Right. Use some judgment.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we're using this LinkedIn profile to talk about how to format the resume, what comes next? Is education after experience?
Education's next, and you just list. Mine I list very plainly on there what I did. I think one of the things, and then my years are on my LinkedIn because I put them on there, but I don't think you have to have your years on your resume. If you are a more recent graduate and a lot of your experience is connected to your college experience, say newspapers, the thing, working in student newspaper, working on student publications, working on student online publications, I would suggest that you list that there with your education. Internships you can list separately because those are more work experience.
Right.
But you want to kind of make that robust. If you're a fair amount away from education, you want to just list where you've been.
What about travel, especially as it's education related? You did a semester in Spain or something.
Yeah, that's great to list.
Does it go under education?
Yeah, I would put it under education. You want to keep like things together, and you want to combine them in that way. This is a place I'll talk about, particularly for recent graduates who, kind of need more on their resumes. Later in your career, you're culling, right? You're trying to edit things out, but earlier in your career, you want more on there. This is a good place. If it's education related, I'd do it here. If not, I would do it in a separate section. But if everybody should do this. But especially if you're a recent grad and you really want to kind of give something extra, something special about you, you can list things like if you're a musician or you were an athlete in college, Eagle Scout is a good thing. People, first of all, something that identifies you and that will give the interviewer something to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times there's affinity there too, right?
Right.
That someone can say, oh, I'm a musician, or my kid's a musician, or whatever, that will kind of give them an opportunity to draw you out a little bit about that. Anything that sort of speaks to the fact that you have of accomplishment and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
People want to see leaders. If you've been involved in an organization, they don't want you just to be involved in an organization. They want to see that you really participated and that perhaps you were in a leadership position in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So after education, I think it's good to have an area on your resume that is awards, kind of the other. Interests is good. The LinkedIn lists it as interests. I wouldn't do that so much on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this point in your resume, again, this is really important. Real estate. So you want to get back to how do you use that real estate well, and this is where you can list awards. If you've done teaching, if you've had some academic experience that went along with other things, that's a good place to list that. Speaking is good, but every time you speak to a group or you do a TV interview, if you're not a TV journalist, I think you have to be careful. It can look really. Again, you don't want to have a big block of something on your resume that's hard to read. So you want to
summarize.
You want to summarize
the speaking engagements and so forth.
And even awards. I mean, I know people on TV, it's great. You can win a lot of TV awards, right? And if you list every TV award you've gotten over 15 years, first of all, it doesn't do you a lot of good. You want to pick and choose. You can say, winner of 15 local TV awards, most recently for series on such and such.
Right.
And that's one other thing I should mention. For journalists, in this section where you're listing your experience, you really want to give a sense of what you did and big stories you were involved with. People can relate to that. Again, it gives them something to talk about, and it gives them some way to think about you. You really want to, it's an era of branding, and you want to leave an impression of the kind of journalist, the kind of work you want to do, the kind of work you've done, and often kind of a little bit of narrative really helps do that.
I think that's really important, this idea of sharing important stories that you've been part of. And I just want to caution journalists out there, because I've read a lot of resumes over the years, don't oversell your involvement in anything. Right. It's great to talk about what you've done, but as soon as an experienced recruiter or recruiting editor starts questioning you about that story or that event, and you can't quite fill in all the pieces, or you have to backtrack a little bit on the way it was presented in a resume, you're probably out the door. So it's really important.
No, I think that's very important, and that speaks to an important issue. Maybe we shouldn't have to say it, but I think it's important to say, you never want to have anything on your resume or connected with any of your material, your LinkedIn page, anything that isn't absolutely accurate. Right. And if that means that you don't want to fudge the truth in any way. Now, and there's obviously a fine line between promoting yourself and your skills and talking, and the facts, but you never want to get on the wrong side of the facts.
Right.
And if you feel at all that you're doing that, then stop yourself, because that will get you in more trouble. And we've seen all these cases in recent years, both in journalism and outside of journalism, about kind of over-promoting your skills.
Right. Going back to the interest section again, you were talking about other experience and interests that show leadership, the Eagle Scout and so forth. What if you do something very unusual? You're part of a puppet troupe, or you do stand-up comedy or something like that. Better to leave it off the resume as being not a serious person, or is it a conversation starter?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line. This is going to sound, maybe a little blunt, but you don't want to look weird. You want to seem to be a serious person that is going to be competitive, in a job environment. But you do want to leave people with something about yourself. So again, use common sense. All of this is common sense. And this is where your kitchen cabinet comes in as well.
Perfect. What about talking about your family on the resume? married, 2 kids.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason. People used to do that. First of all, recruiters and hiring managers get uncomfortable because they're not supposed to ask questions that could get them into legal trouble. So if you have that on there, it's on there. And then the question is, why is that on there? What are you trying to tell us? If it comes up in a conversation, somehow about kids and maybe, their picture, they have a picture of their kids on their desk and, you want to talk about that, that's fine. But again, you have to be careful. You want this to be about your work, your job goals, what you've accomplished. So you get into the personal, and I'm not sure that does you much good.
Right, and I'm assuming the same advice would go for anything about religion. Don't talk about it.
Don't talk about religion, and don't talk about politics unless you're talking about what you've covered as a political reporter.
Right.
I was a training director and recruiter at CQ, and we basically were very nonpartisan, and we're very careful about that. And I had people usually applying for internships, not full-time journalists. Were kind of more careful about this, but they would put on their resumes some things about campaigns they were involved in. Well, you're going to a place that's very nonpartisan. That's just not a good idea.
Right. So that sort of leads us into a discussion of social media in general, because journalists may be completely nonpartisan in their work life, but sometimes they are involved in something outside of work that might be questionable. So talk about Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. How much of your personal life is it okay to put out there if you're a professional journalist who's looking to be networking?
Right. And you should be networking, and obviously social networking is an important part of networking. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to broaden your network in the real world, which is also very important. Right. But it is important, and people should be doing it, and you can gain, with your followers and with your connections and your Facebook friends, that can be a good part of your network. However, you have to be careful in what you have and how you manage that when you're job hunting, because obviously recruiters are going to go be looking at these things.
Now, I've had young people say to me, my Facebook page is completely scrubbed. I only put my party pictures on Instagram because that's completely private and no one else sees it except my friends. Good enough?
I assume nothing's private these days. Given what we know about the NSA and other things, assume nothing's private, and then you won't be surprised later on.
Okay.
So I think, again, you get to have a life. Yes, you get to have a Facebook page, but use common sense and know that a recruiter is going to go look. Sometimes you need to look at what people are putting on your page as well as what you're posting. That's important. And so if you have friends who want to send the party pictures and that kind of thing, be careful. Scrub the page, and also the other thing is you want to be using it, especially Twitter accounts. These are things that's building your brand as a journalist.
Right.
So if half of it is about other things, I think as a recruiter I would look and say, even if it's there's no real red flags, party picture kind of red flags, you're saying, well, here they are, they covered this, and their Twitter feed is not really about that. What's that about? Right. So you want to use it for good.
Right. I want to go back to something you said about Facebook, because I think a lot of people don't realize that their Facebook page, their public profile may look different. It may include things that were posted not just by them. So if you have that friend who's very politically involved, who's posting screeds about elections and so forth, you may want to just hide that friend from the feed, because that can get you in, that can look as bad as your own posts.
Right. And I know sometimes people will say, well, none of this is fair and I should be able to have this, a personal life. Yes, you should. But when you're job hunting, you have to think about what is public facing. And people will look, they do look. On LinkedIn, I think it's really, that can be a real benefit for people who, while you're in a job hunt. And I think people will go there. Journalists are not usually recruited. There's not recruiters necessarily running around LinkedIn looking for journalists, but it is a good tool in terms of networking with other people who can help you in your search.
Right. So what else should we talk about in terms of the resume before we move to networking? what else needs to be on there? We've talked about experience and other interests and education. Is there a last piece?
Well, the last piece is references, and I'm going to provide a fabulous tip. Well, first of all, with references, the old days of, and another thing that's changed is you say references available upon request. Right. I always thought that was funny because, like, who's going to say, no, I'm not going to give you my references? You have to ask. These days, again, partly because of real estate, and partly because it just doesn't seem that, you know, if somebody wants them, they're going to ask you. A lot of people don't include references on their resume. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, and they have them as a separate list, which you can do, and that once you are in the process of, you know, your few steps down the road, you will give them your references. Mm-hmm. I'll just say a quick word on references. They should be people who do know you well, not mm-hmm. just names. Sometimes people think, you know, or people who used to be your editor and, oh, they once worked with me and you haven't talked to them in 5 years, and, oh, you know, you get an email. I get this sometimes. Oh, will you be my reference? Well, I don't know your work anymore. That mm-hmm. wouldn't be very useful. People you're in touch with, who you stay in touch with, and who are available, and always list a phone number as well as an email address. People want to talk to someone when they're recruiting. Or they at least want to talk to a few of your references. So, right. And those should be current, and these people should obviously know that you are looking for a job. Right. Also, you can prepare them. They can really help you if you can talk to them about, you know, I'd really love you to emphasize this part of the kind of experience I had, or these projects we worked on together.
Right.
My tip, though, is if you do want to put this on your resume, a way to get people's attention right away is to have it almost like a book jacket blurb, where somebody says something, it's a quote about you, and their name, the reference's name, and then how to reach them, because it's working for you right away.
Absolutely. It's not just their name, it's here's how I feel about her, right. or something great we did together, and you want to know more, here's my contact.
Right, and you're much more likely, I think a recruiter, hiring manager is much more likely to call that person then. And that's something you can have too, even if you don't have it on your written resume, if you have a website, you can have several of those on there. And they also look nice.
Yeah, beautiful. Great tip. We have another question about Twitter, and that is, should a journalist, a working journalist, have both a professional Twitter account and a separate personal account?
I think that's a good idea. As with many things in job hunting, mm-hmm. You know, keeping personal and professional separate is good. Managing them, you have to have enough time to manage them. What you want to make sure of with any, you know, social media, and especially if you are regularly blogging, for instance, that these are not things that you do every 3 months or something, that you do it on a regular basis. So if you do decide to do a personal Twitter account in addition to your professional one, that's one that you keep up with as well.
Right. Makes sense. All right. I think we've exhausted the resume, and I really want to talk about networking, because as we said at the open, this is something you should be doing all the time as a journalist. Talk about why it's so important.
Well, first of all, your network is how you're going to get jobs. I know some people think, well, when you start looking for a job, you get your resume out there, you look for what's open, and you apply for it.
You apply online.
Yeah, and that just doesn't work. And I know I'm bursting the bubbles of a lot of people who spend a lot of time doing this, but it doesn't work. I would say 90% or more of jobs, at least in our field, people get through connections that they have. And the way to have those connections is to work a network. And again, it doesn't have to just be a couple well-placed people. It really is people you have gotten to know over the years. People who know your work and can speak for your work are the way that you're going to get those jobs. And by investing in that network over time is the way that you are going to, you know, develop that over time. It doesn't mean that you don't have the skills. You need the skills. Right. You need competitive skills. You need to have a really good experience, a good and often a varied kinds of experience to kind of keep up with what's happening. All those things are true. But without a network, mm-hmm. You're going to, unless you're willing to stay at the same place you've been for a very long time, and a lot of times these days that isn't an option because things change and people need to find new jobs. You need to go back to that network. You're going to, I tell people who are starting off in their careers, they're going to have at least 7 jobs. And so you need a network that's going to help you get there.
Well, so it sounds like you're saying people you work with are the most important sort of base scaffolding for your network. It also sounds like you're saying I do not have to be at a happy hour every night, which would be a great relief.
Right.
But without that, without constantly being out there, how do you manage to create a large enough network so that it's really there for you when you need it?
Well, the first thing, excuse me, you want to do is to make sure that your network, that you have an organized way of accessing your network. A lot of people, know people over time. You meet people, you have a bunch of business cards, and you stuff them somewhere. And then when it comes time to sort of activate the network, when you are looking for a job, or you're, for whatever reason, you're trying to sell a book or you market your book, all of a sudden, oh my God, all those people I know, how do I find them? So you want to have an organized database. It can be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be you use the contacts in your iPad. All those kinds. However it's simple for you, but you want to keep it updated. You want to have the information updated, and you want to be able to readily access it.
Perfect.
So, and then whenever you do get a new business card, or have a small stack of business cards, you can go ahead and update your database with those. And not only how do you connect the people, how do the person's background or wherever they are that is of use to you, but how you met them and who else they're connected to, because that's the way to really establish that network. You do this through a number of ways. One is obviously people you've worked with. Keeping up with where they are is important.
Right. All the journalism groups.
Right. And so one of the ways you do this is obviously people where you used to work. Journalism groups are important, particularly specialty journalism organizations. If you're a business editor, join the business editors group. If you're a religion writer, join the religion writers groups. Other affinity groups, alumni groups are great for this. And Washington is a great place for this because there's so many, and New York and other big cities, where you have a lot of your alumni. These are people who have a vested interest in you, including, particularly for young people who have graduated, who've made it in their careers, who really want to give back. So I say milk the alumni groups for all that's worth. The other thing about being involved in organizations is you want people to be able to see your work. One of the reasons that people who you used to work with are great recommendations for you is that they've seen your work. They can really recommend you based on really good evidence. If you're in an organization and you just show up, they don't know you except to schmooze with you, right? But if you were on a board with somebody, you did a project, you were on a committee, people can speak to how organized you were and what good ideas you had. That really goes a much longer way to them being able to really recommend you.
Right. Now, what if the worst happens? And we have a question from a viewer now who wants to know, what if you have been unemployed for more than a year? This is a journalist who, because of an illness, was out of the job market for a while, recovered, sidestepped into PR because that's what was available, and now would like to get another full-time job in journalism. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, and first of all, it's hard, and my sympathies, because that's a hard situation, and many people have been, if not exactly there, in a somewhat similar situation. My suggestion is you want people who you want to work for to be seeing your work, right? And so just sending it into some, this is where the online application really doesn't work for you. One of the things that you can do, or you can try to do, if you want to, you think, okay, this is a place I might want to work, or these are the sets of publications I might be interested in, is to try to entice them with being able to do some work for them on a freelance basis. Not everybody takes freelance, that kind of thing, but a lot of people will, or it's a really good sort of entree into your work.
Is it worth volunteering?
Well, it's always better to be paid.
Agreed.
For all kinds of obvious reasons,
Agreed.
but also because people are more serious about it if they're paying you. That's the other part of that equation.
Right.
They take it more seriously.
Right.
But if not, you can volunteer, or you can send something for their consideration.
Right. So find a way to step back into the job market, not on a full-time basis if you can't do that immediately, but do some work, put your work out there. What about a personal blog?
Right, and again, can be a calling card. I think it's a great idea. People can see your writing when you're applying for jobs. They go and they look at that and they say, "Oh, wow, this person has a nice writing style." But again, you have to be willing to commit to it, because I'll tell you, sometimes when I was doing recruiting and people would have a blog on there and they had updated it, 4 months ago or something, It makes you think, well, how serious are they about this? You don't want to you don't want to do anything that you're not, sort of regularly paying attention to. So I think it's a good thing to do, but again, you have to be able to have the time commitment to do that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Is there anything else about networking that we should really think about or make a point of letting journalists know?
Yeah, a couple tips. One is you want to network with the well-networked.
Oh.
First of all, they have larger networks, and if you network with somebody and you go to, you're on LinkedIn with them and they have this big network, you can sort of see, oh, okay, here's other people that I may be able to get to know through them. The other thing is they like to do this. That these are people who enjoy kind of getting to know other people and who often like to help other people. And so think about that. But the other thing I would say is this is something you need to be doing on a regular basis. And part of it is doing things for people so that when you come and say, hey, I'd really like to work at this organization. I know you know somebody there. Could you get me an informational interview? It won't be, oh, why should I help you? What have you done for me? Right. I mean, not that anyone's ever going to say that, but they're going to think it. I often get people who I haven't been in touch with in a long time saying, oh, I'm job hunting. Could you help me? Well, I haven't heard from you in 5 years.
Right.
It's much, if you're talking to somebody on a regular basis or in contact with them and you've done things to help people they care about, you've done things, you've been on a committee and done good work for a cause they care about, they're much more likely when it comes time to say, oh yeah, I'd be happy to help.
I find people are even appreciative if you see something in the news that is on their beat or peripheral to it that you think they'd be interested in. Send them a link and say, thought you'd like this.
Right, exactly.
How are you?
And that's a good way to stay in touch, absolutely. Right. So I think that's part of it. It does, having a network it's like anything else. You have to invest in it. But if you do, it will be there for you when you need it. And I think that's the most important thing about so-called networking, is that this is something you have to be doing over a long period of time. It can't just be, oh, God, I got to go do some networking now because I want to move on in my career.
Right. And I think it's important, too, for journalists to be able to think about networking as something that you really are doing in order to help others and have them help you. It's not about using people. I think sometimes we feel squeamish if we're going about it the wrong way and we are just, oh, I need a job, who can I call? But it's a very mutual kind of relationship, and you're not just trying to take advantage of your contacts.
Right, exactly, or vice versa. I think people sometimes feel awkward about kind of pitching themselves, and they feel sometimes awkward about people coming to them and wanting things. But if you think of it as not so much a transactional relationship, but one that will last, I think that's an important way to think about it. And also that this is the way to move forward in your career. It isn't something that's separate. It really is part of managing your career.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question here. What is your advice for reporters who have freelanced for a very long time, including for very marquee names? So I freelanced for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. This person says there's a definite hiring bias against freelancers because they assume you can't handle the demands of a newsroom. With 15 years of experience, this person's still having a tough time getting callbacks. Any advice?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good question, and I think that they're probably, I don't know if I would call it bias, but again, because often people who are in hiring positions were in news organizations, they were not freelancers, right? Many of them wouldn't, or they wouldn't sort of be there. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe some of them were at one point in their career, but many of them haven't been for a long time. So again, people are more used to people like them. And so you have sort of have to get around that if you're a freelancer. And so think about, like any obstacle in life. Okay, here's the obstacle. how do I sort of knock this down? What is going to be their concern about me as a freelancer, valid or not? But what is the likely concern, and therefore think about being proactive in addressing it. So if the concern is, well, would you be able to handle the rigorous real-time demands of many newsrooms now? That's what you kind of on your resume even use words that sort of show that you do a lot, if you do. Again, be honest. But if you've dealt with, as part of your freelance career, you've done editing on quick turn deadlines, say that. Make those cases. Have those examples ready to sort of combat this. I don't think the bias, if you will, is so much about freelancers per se, but is it about being able to do the kind of work that, the quick turn work that is so much of what journalism is today.
One thing I found about freelancers is that they often are more disciplined than people in a newsroom because they have to keep churning out stories and pitching stories while they're working on other stories, and that can be a very valuable characteristic in a newsroom if you have a reporter who's really self-motivated and driven.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing is to use, again, speak to your strengths. As a freelancer, you have to do all these things, besides just the work, right? You're actually in a way managing a business.
Absolutely.
So, kind of think about ways to not only combat the perceived bias of, knock down what might be their concerns, but also some strengths that you as a freelancer have that may come in handy.
Yeah. Speak to your strengths. Well, so we talked about editors now. Let's get to that, because for every journalist, managing editors is a big part of managing their career. It's that editor who's going to allow you to move to the next step, maybe write your letter, etc. You've got sort of 4 doctrines for dealing with editors, and I'd love to talk about them. The first one, and I love this, doctrine of no surprises.
That's right. And being an editor, I really believe in this, not only in terms of for people to whom I report, but people who I work with. Nobody likes to be surprised, and often in newsrooms and in fast-paced newsrooms, which many of the places we work are now, things happen quickly, and there's a lot of things going on. And if you're not fully sort of in the know on a regular basis, you can make mistakes with your bosses, and so you always appreciate people who come to you and say, there may be a problem with this story, or I may not be able to get, it may not be the angle we wanted because of these things. I'll let you know, but I wouldn't necessarily expect to have it, today or in the hour or whatever it is. Much better to know that than when you say, "Where's the story?" Well, here's a problem, because you've already promised it, right?
Yeah.
And on larger things, if they think there's somebody who may be calling you about a correction or clarification or has a beef, valid or not, much better to hear from them than when you get the phone call or get the email.
Right. No editor wants to be surprised by a phone call from an unhappy source.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And especially if it's something that you're going to need to explain up the line.
Right.
So doctrine of no surprises, even though some of those conversations are hard to have, I think it is almost universally appreciated, sort of the warning things, and also about good things too.
Right.
And sometimes people don't. They think they're not. That they're marketing themselves or something. But if they've gotten some really good feedback in a story, editors like to share that. So keep your editor informed.
Absolutely. And on the no surprises, I just want to turn it around for a minute, because I know we had some editors who were registered for this webinar, and maybe they're watching, and I think it's incumbent on editors also to be in close enough communication with your reporters that they feel like they have an opening, they have a conduit to tell you when things are starting to go south. So you can't just huddle at your desk in the corner. I would say the corner office, but no editors have corner offices anymore. But you can't just huddle in your cube, sending messages now and then and just waiting for that story to come at the end of the day. You have to be involved throughout the process and give the reporter opportunities to talk about how things are going, so that you can help nip these problems in the bud, or at least transmit up the line that we may not have this story for today.
Right, and I think that's important. And a lot of times people are working remotely. We're not all together anymore.
Right.
And I think it really is important not just to send email. If someone's working remotely, my reporters are on the Hill during the week, and we talk on the phone all the time. Because there's something about that, at least voice-to-voice contact. If people are remote, really remote geographically, Skype and other things are great to do on a regular basis, not just when you want to have a big meeting.
Absolutely. You alluded a minute ago to the doctrine of singing your own praises,
Yes.
at least sometime. When good things happen, tell your editor.
Absolutely. And I think this is another thing. People are sometimes thinking, well, it sounds like I'm bragging, but remember, the editor was part of that process. So if a story, if somebody important or somebody that said something about the story that is worth repeating, let them know and sing your own praises. Remind your editors about what. Sometimes they forget what it takes to get certain kinds of things, and that hey, I have to do a lot of interviews for this, and I have to sit down and read through a lot of documents, and I have that expertise. That's why you have me in this job.
Right.
So sometimes doing that, reminding them of that is important, because again, editors are busy people. They're doing 8 million things, and sometimes just sort of, yes, that is why we hired you is good to be reminded.
Right. Right. And that causes the editor in the news meeting when they're presenting that story to say, so-and-so spent 6 hours at the courthouse and we got these nuggets out of these documents, thanks
that we wouldn't
to,
have gotten.
Exactly.
Right. Absolutely.
So that's not bad for anybody.
Right.
This one sounds like advice not only for the newsroom but for life, the doctrine of the golden rule.
That's right. I think that a lot of times there are misunderstandings because people can treat people out of frustration or lack of time to have a full conversation, and they want to blame it on the other person. And if you remember how you want to be treated, that you want people to listen to you, that you want to feel included, that you want to be part of the decision-making process. I think these are things that reporters all the time say, oh, people just made a decision and told me what it was. Right. But if you want to be treated that way, then as an editor, you have to treat your reporters that way, and vice versa. I think if everybody thought a little bit more about treating people with respect and fairness and all the golden rule things, that it would be a better place.
And that leads us right into the doctrine, which I think may be one of the most important in any job, and that is the doctrine of coming up with solutions. Don't come and dump your problems on me.
That's right. And this is true of, managing your editor, but really almost all, I would say, relationships in journalism with your sources. Right. A lot of times people say, well, they won't talk to me. Well, did you give them a good reason to talk to you? Did you tell them, hey, if you talk to me for this story, it's going to be seen by all these people, and this is an important story for these reasons. Sometimes they won't talk to you anyways, but you need to give them a reason. So I think it's really important to come up with solutions, to think about that person, and when you come to them and ask, for something, whether it's another position or some budget request or better play for the story.
Right.
What are they up against?
Right.
in giving you that? And how can you make it easier? How can you make it easier for them to give you what you're going to want?
Perfect. Jody Schneider, thank you so much. This has been terrific, and I want to thank everyone who participated today, including those people who asked questions. I want to remind you not to miss our upcoming webinars. On October 23rd, we have a fascinating conversation with NPF's Bob Myers and Ambassador Valentin Zellweger. They're going to talk about looted national treasure in Swiss banks, stolen millions from Haiti, Angola, and elsewhere. Can that money be returned? That's October 23rd, and you can sign up on the website at nationalpress.org. You can also sign up for the newsletter or make a donation. Meanwhile, thank you for joining us in the Evelyn Y. Davis studios at the National Press Foundation, where we are making good journalists better.